Hey everybody, this is Ari in the Air. Welcome back to the channel. Stoked you're here. Today, I've got the second video in the series with my friend Gavin McClurg about his awesome new book, Advanced Paragliding, what he's learned from the world's best pilot through his podcast, The Cloud-Based Mayhem. And I wanted to make this video series as a way for Gavin and I to share with you guys some of the just critical insights from comp pilots all over the world about some of the foundational skills in paragliding. Today, the episode is about gliding, which is so incredibly important. We can't stress that enough, and it's something that doesn't get talked about that much. So this book is packed full of all kinds of insights for these foundational skills. So if you're a serious pilot, you're probably going to want this on your shelf. I have a link in the description below to buy the book. And also, if you appreciate this channel and these videos and you want to support me, consider subscribing to my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/AirInTheAir. I also do philosophical coaching calls and paraglide coaching over Zoom. I can help you out with your life and your paragliding if you're so interested. So without further ado, today we're talking about gliding. Lots of lessons that come out of this awesome book. Here we go. Okay, Gavin, welcome back. Episode 2 of Advanced Paragliding. What I've learned from the world's best pilots here. We're talking about gliding. I want to hear from you how it is that you think about gliding and what some of the biggest lessons that you've got from the podcast and that are now in this book.
Yeah, gliding, man, dark art. Steven Smoker, I think it's in the book, taught Kriegel, that whenever you're turning, you're going the wrong way half the time. So glide. And what Kriegel started doing at least 10 years ago was he would time himself on routes that he'd flown a lot. He lives in just outside of Interlaken, and he would, do a triangle A, B, C and get home and do it in an hour 6. These are big triangles. And then you do it in an hour 5 and an hour 4. And it was just from, I remember one time seeing him years ago way before my first X-Alps, going into the Furka Pass. And, the way you do that is it's textbook. You get high before you get to the Grimsel, which is the snake for the reason. And you glide in there and get as deep as you can on the glacier. You turn around, you run like crazy and try to get another climb. And you don't go in there low. Just nobody does that. And one day I was flying and, we're all doing that. And there's this glider way down below our feet, just cruising on the terrain and going in on the glacier and turning around and coming back out. And I checked X contest that day at the end of the day. And of course, he did what we had all done in half the time. So gliding is a dark art, and it's, I think, the hardest thing to describe. There's some magic there for sure.
There really is some magic. But there are also some pretty meaty things that come up for me in this. And there's some tips here in the book. And one of the first ones is from Marco, and it's don't touch the brakes. And it's not even in relation to speed as much as it is just efficiency.
Yeah. And he really changed my flying. That podcast I did with him, his whole bit on the harness and being relaxed and letting yourself move. This is something I've also learned from Farmer, who's also in this chapter, and Matt Beechner. He's a Jedi glider. He's one of the best in the world. And he's so relaxed. It's like he's dead in the harness. He's just totally let the wing doing its thing. And I think that's big, not fighting it. And the other one that Marco says, like I said, it really changed my flying, is because it doesn't matter what aspect wing you're on, what level wing you're on. If you touch the B's or the brakes, you're blowing your glide every single time. Every single time you're just losing a little bit of efficiency. And I've been flying two liners a long time, and man, it is hard to get off the bees. You're just, it's in rough air when it's bouncing you around. You just don't want to let that thing go. But to some extent, to glide well, you got to let it go. You got to trust it, and you've got to be, the more bar you're on. Again, these days, there's a little bit of a change when you step down in aspect or wings, but these days they harden up and they just get more bomb proof the more bar you're using. So, and again, that's not totally across the board, but I think you do have to be a little bit more hands-on on a B and a C when you're using a lot of bar. But yeah, relax, let the wing do it, and pay a lot of attention to the overall quality of your line and move fast. Farmer right here, talks about the value of reading all the old books, all the old sailplane books and all the old hang gliding books. Those folks know how to glide, because they've got much better gliders than we do. They're really good at picking lines. Listen to the show with Dustin Martin, but you see it in people who've spent a lot of time on higher performance aircraft. They understand the importance of spending no time on a shit line. And so part of it is moving fast. Part of it is, 90 something percent more is feel, and that's just time. And then I think what really changed for me, I became a much better glider after listening to Marco's podcast by just chilling out, just relaxing and getting off the wing and letting it do its thing.
I love this. There's so many things in here. The first thing that you recently mentioned is that hang gliders and sailplane pilots have better gliders. But I also, just like to geek out for just a moment, is that when you have a flat wing, a rigid wing, if you add bank angle to that, you lose efficiency at a much higher rate than a parabola wing does. So we fly a parabola, they're flying a flat thing. If we bank up 15 degrees, we lose, X amount, but they're losing twice that. So they just can't afford to turn like we can afford to turn.
Good point.
There's also this idea of keeping your hands off the glider. And when we talked about thermaling and we talked about efficiency in thermaling, we kind of came to this like Goldilocks moment of like you don't touch the glider, but don't let the glider pitch around. So there's this like Goldilocks thing, and it's like the minimum input is what we're looking for. Because obviously, like if you stand on bar flying across the flats of Chelan on your two-liner and you just let whatever happens to the glider happen, you're not flying efficiency.
It's a recipe for an accident too.
It's a recipe for an accident, but also it's just not efficient, because you have to control the pitch of the glider to keep it flying in the direction that you're trying to go, which is not up and it's not down, it's that way. So there's this Goldilocks thing of the minimum input. And for me, as I've been learning to glide better, one of the most important things for me is I would rather pull on the rears than come off the bar.
Definitely. I think there's a point there where physics tells us it's not very efficient. If you're really on a ton of bar and you're on a ton of B, it's not much different than brakes, and you're really distorting the wing, and then you're putting yourself in a pretty dangerous position. But I would totally agree. And I think all the best pilots would agree with that. When you're going through some rowdy air, but you're not going to be thermaling or taking a turn, it's much more efficient to stay on bar and
use the rears.
And
I think that as the BC bridge system just permeates the entire industry, and soon we'll have all Bs will have a BC connection, a really valuable, super meaty piece of advice that I would give pilots is it's better to manipulate the glider with the rear risers than to come off the bar.
I think coming off the bar and going to your brakes is an absolute last resort.
Yeah,
And I can tell you from my own experience, that takes a lot of practice.
it sure does.
It's just totally opposite of what your brain wants to do. You want to, holy shit, come on, grab it. These wings can handle, a little input from the bees, and you can practice this in SIV to an extent, but you don't get the jostling around and ratty air from doing that. But these wings can take it. If they're on bar, they're really tight across the span, and they're much less prone to blowing out. And they just need a little bit of help. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think that connection. What I don't like to see is, we see it a lot in the high end comps these days, is people gliding with their arms completely in.
Uh-huh.
And man, I don't know. I don't know if that little bit of performance gain is really worth that, but a lot of them are doing it. It is more efficient through the air for sure. Our pods are a big drag, but anyway, let's set that aside. The point of it is it, especially on the lower end wings, like you're saying with the BC bridge, you're developing feel, you're developing you know connection to the wing, which is what you really want. And uh, stay off the brakes for sure. You got to stay off the brakes. The other big one that I'm not sure if this is in the book, but I learned this from Farmer, actually from watching him. Um, but the tendency, we have to teach our brains that a lot of the things that it wants to do are not correct in flying. For example, if you take a little hit on the right side, what do you want to do naturally? Go left, right? You want to keep it from collapsing. That's absolutely the wrong thing to do. You have to drop your right butt cheek down into that. Be way more efficient. It's going to keep the glider pressurized, but it's antithetical to what our brains want to do. It's opposite of how it wants to react. So this is a really important skill in thermaling and in gliding, but especially in gliding. And that's what I mean by kind of being relaxed and going with it. Kayakers get really good at this sport really fast because they're naturally good at that. That's how you keep a boat upright in eddies and water that's going in a bunch of different ways. You have to stay with the boat. You have to have really, really loose hips. And that's, I think, really key to good gliding.
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like some of these things, and we talked about some of this in thermaling as well, we're getting into like the really, really, really high level stuff that's counterintuitive, that, like the master instructors, the Kelly Farinas and stuff, have been teaching this one way for so long. And then you kind of break into this like really, really high echelon of starting to do things that are kind of counterintuitive. Um, I I think that what we've already talked about, just this idea of staying off the brakes, becoming a really good glider handler through the bees, through the rears, and developing this trust. I think that practically, I would tell people to use more speed bar when they're at their local flying site, like use more speed bar and fly on the rears. That's a great practical tip to start developing this touch with the glider and this trust for your glider when you're on the speed bar. I think a lot of instructors in the last 15 years have done a disservice. And now that glider technology is going so vertical with how stable gliders are on speed bar, it behooves you as a pilot to be able to fly the entire speed range of your glider, and flying it comfortably and calmly. But
You know what I think, Ari, just to chime in on that, how much training does that take? It's so much.
It
When
is.
I think about, Farmer and Nate and I, when we're talking about flying big lines here, we always say the same thing. Imagine if we had just done that like we comp fly. Imagine if we had just flown that 300K like we comp fly. We would have gone 400K. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a whole different world. And when you're in big air and strong air, you have to train to use that. It's just, I'm still, after all this time and all the time I've spent on CCC gliders, I never use the speed bar as much as I do in a comp. You know, it's 80% more. I mean, it's something that it's just, you have to do it. And there, like you said, the full range and micro adjustments every time you go flying. Every single time you go off the hill, you should be playing with your speed bar and playing with your bees and trying to tamp down. And again, this, I mean, at least for me, this has taken so long and I'm still so bad at it. I give my wing way too much input. I know I do. You know, when you're in rowdy air, like in Chelan and things are bouncing you around, man, I'm on that puppy. And I know it's twice, it's too much. It's way too much. Watch Josh Cohn. He's so smooth. So yeah, it takes a lot, but this is not something that you're going to listen to this, you know, little diatribe between the two of us and figure out. This is going to be, it's a long time.
Yeah. But this idea that it's better to manipulate the glider on the rears than come off the speed bar. And it's also faster to come off the speed bar than take a collapse. It kind of like helps us prioritize like where we're learning. Like if you're taking wax, like you need to like come off the bar and manipulate the glider with the rears more. And then like once the glider's staying open, then you can start tuning it down little by little, less input, better inputs, more precise and better, more timely inputs. That's really, I think, what fine tuning it looks like is more precision, more timeliness. The inputs that really translate into the proper input of the glider. So ma'am, please hold. I've got a big black dog staring me down. But we've covered a lot of really good stuff here. And what I want to hear is about line choice. Okay. So give me 15 seconds.
Yep.
Okay. So I think as far as handling the glider on glide is something that we've covered. And also it's just hilarious to know that it just depends. Everything depends in paragliding. Sorry, everyone.
Sorry, everybody.
But I want to hear about line choice. How do you find it? What are things that you're looking for and how can you improve your line choice?
Yeah, it's that magic combo between, you know, paying enough attention to your instruments, but not letting that overshadow feel. I have struggled mostly with my gliding over my career. You know, I don't know how many times I have left with, you know, a group of people and I come in at the other side, you know, lower. And it seems to be the fix to an extent. You know, I still blow that as everybody does, but it seems to be the extent is not being over what's the word? Not being overly weighed on by other pilots and not being overly optimistic about your own ideas. So what I mean by that is I have seen 100 pilots at a comp take a terrible line. So they're all just lemmings while someone like Josh or, you know, is just over here going, you know, so it's just like thermaling. Move. You've got to move. If you're on a bad line, you've got to be really aggressive about it. If you're in the flatlands flying in wind, you know, it might be, you know, we always hear 45 degrees. That's not nearly enough. It could be 90, you know. So A, move. B, if you're onto a better line, just watch your glide like a hawk. You know, keep watching the sky like a hawk. Observation is everything in the sport, but just like thermaling, there's usually going to be a little bit better bit of that. So don't be satisfied with it. So keep searching, but watch it. If you fall off a little bit of it, you can usually tell I fell off to the right a little bit, or I fell off to the left a little bit. Just crab ever so slightly back. And then finally, I would say, like in thermaling, you know, I for a long time, I thought, oh, I should go to that climb, but they're too far away. That's the same with gliding. We are much closer than we think to everybody. We can get there much faster than we think, even on our slow rags. So, um, if you see someone I learned this way back in the beginning in Haiti, flying with Nick. We took off and he just went, and I went and dirted. And he just went, well, dude, why didn't you follow me? Well, I don't know. There's a bunch of trees and it seemed kind of sketchy. And I didn't know if I was going to get it if I went over there. And he's like, yeah, but I showed you the ray, man. Go. And so, I think this is 90% of it when you're early. When you're new, you just watch people not move, stick with their lousy climb, stick with their lousy glide. And so again, never be satisfied, always be searching, and use the force, Luke. It is definitely a dark art. I think a lot of that whole being calm and relaxed really helps.
Yeah. Yeah, being calm and relaxed is the only way that you can really open yourself up, all your sensory motor perception, to be observant. And being observant is the biggest thing in cross-country paragliding. There is the amount of information you can take in from your own experience, from the terrain, from the sky, from pilots, from birds, from dust, all of this stuff. You really unlock that when you become calm, and gliding is a time of observation. It really is.
Yeah, I'll tell you a good story that I think highlights this really well. Willie and Cody and I were flying across Nevada a few springs ago. We were all getting ready. That was their first X Alps, so it was the 2019 race, and it was insanely cold, like just mind-splitting cold. And it was spring, and Cody and I kind of got the jump on Willie, and we got out in front of him, and ahead of us was a lot of blue. The sky did not look very good, and there was a pretty obvious cloud streak that just to me seemed way too far away. It was just, well, we can't get there, and it's way off our planned course, and it was kind of crabbing. It was still downwind, but it was 30 degrees off the wind, and I just wanted to go straight, and I wanted to stay low. I didn't want to get taller than we were because I was so cold. And we all had very good flights that day, but Cody would have broken the Nevada state record if there wasn't a little airspace issue at the end, because he left and followed the obvious line. It was up north of the Rubies. And, so he took that time to go off course line to get to that line and just destroyed me at the end. This is something that I see Bill Belcourt doing all the time, that we get in this race mentality where, the arrow's pointing that way. I got to go that way. Sometimes this way is a lot faster, doing a little C hook and staying out of the blue and going with the cloud line. And because you're just going to dolphin through that. I think a lot of gliding is understanding the energy of the day. I saw this a lot in Turkey, that, the sky pulses, right? Especially if you've got a day that has a lot of cloud, and it will pulse, and a lot of cloud, a lot of shade, and it will ease off, and then it will pulse. And so you've got to do everything you can to get in sync with that. And that's what you can do on gliding. There are times where you want to glide really fast. That cloud in front of you is growing. It's clearly better. You clearly need to get there quick. Okay, leave whatever you're in and go quick. But there's other times where, you've observed this because you're really good at observing, right? And you've done every time you're thermal and you're looking at everything. You're not just worried about what's right in front of you. You're looking at the whole sky and mapping it out. Is this a time to make a jump to another line? Is that line better? Is there too much shade on my line? All these kind of things. And that all just comes down to observation. And the last little thing, I think there's a quote from me in the book on gliding. A big one is, if there's wind and you're on a crosswind route, let's say you're in a comp and you're not just going downwind, always, whenever you can, try to get to windward. It's always much easier to fall off, always keep pilots downwind of you. And you make that extra effort to get upwind. So, because if a cloud pops to windward, it's pretty hard to get to it. But if something pops to leeward, it's super easy just to fall off and bang into it. But if it's a long, if it's a long turn point, or if it's a long way to go in a crosswind thing, if you just fly directly at the turn point on the glide, you're going to arrive way downwind, right? It just doesn't work that way. So you've got to crab, and whenever you can take that climb to windward, go get it. It might be hard to do because the other pilots are getting out in front of you, but you're going to be able to close the gap on them at the end. So that was another bit of strategic gliding advice I got quite a ways back down at Minorca that has really helped.
Those are all really great tips. And there's so many more here in Advanced Paragliding by our friend Gavin McClurg, what he's learned from the world's best pilot and what he's learned from being one. So, yeah, thanks so much. This has been helpful for my gliding. And the next thing on the next video here, we're going to talk about safety and progression, which is something that your podcast has been pivotal for so many people on. So thanks so much for the lessons, and looking forward to the next one. Yeah. See you on the next one, buddy.